So this is our 10-step guide to writing a fact-based response to Northern Pulp's focus report. So what we're focusing on is responding to the focus report. And just to give a little bit of background to refresh people's memory, that back the end of January, the Northern Pulp filed their environmental assessment, and then the public had 30 days to respond, which we did in a huge, huge way. And I firmly believe that it made a lot of difference to the Environment Minister's review of the project and where we find ourselves today. So after that 30-day public response time, the minister made her decision that a focus report was required, and so Northern Pulp then filed their focus report, of course, earlier this month. Please note that Northern Pulp were given a year to file a response, and they chose to file early, so they chose to file, I think it's 6 months or so. So that triggered a further 30-day public response period. So we're in the middle of that now. We're in the middle of the 30-day public response. So, can you just go back?
I'm sorry.
So we have just 30 days as a public to review the focus report and to respond to it in writing. So that 30-day period takes us until Friday, November the 8th at 11:59 p.m. So that's the drop dead deadline. That is the last possible date that you can file your public response to this focus report.
Can I ask a question?
We didn't talk about that. Just hold on to your questions until the end, I think, if you don't mind. Thank you. So backing up a bit then, when the Environment Minister made her decision and said that there shall be a focus report, part of that process involved the Environment Minister giving Northern Pulp their terms of reference. And the terms of reference is a document that you'd be able to find online, and it's a very important document because what it does is it sets out all of the questions that Northern Pulp is required to answer during this process. So I have printed them out here, but I'm saying if you go on to the Nova Scotia Environmental Assessment Projects, you Google those words, that'll take you to the terms of reference. And actually, if you go online, see the TOR there, the right-hand side with the arrow. If you're online and you click on that word or that icon, it'll take you directly to the terms of reference. So I encourage everyone to go there, review the terms of reference so that you have an idea of what exactly it is that the Environment Minister asked Northern Pulp to provide additional information on. So for example, conduct geotechnical surveys and provide the survey results to confirm viability of the marine portion of the pipeline route. The surveys must determine the potential impacts of ice scour on the pipeline. So that's an example of one of the topics that Northern Pulp was required to address and that they've said they've addressed in the focus report that they've filed. So if that interests you, you ought to keep that term of reference in mind and then review the focus report to see whether or not that question is answered. So you might wonder, can I only write about the terms of reference? Can can I only write about the answers that Northern Pulp provided to those questions set out in the terms of reference? And the answer, as we set out here, is no. You don't need to just write about the terms of reference. You can write about any issue. But keep in mind that the terms of reference includes two broad requirements. So two broad things that Northern Pulp must answer. And we have them set out there as to impact, mitigation, conclusions. And then an interesting point as well is that they were required to provide a response to all of the questions that we as a public put forward in our earlier response, and answer all the questions that the various government departments asked as well. And so that can be found in the focus report. So have a look at that section of the focus report. It's called the concordance table. Keep in mind the questions that you might have asked the last time that you submitted your comments, and see if they answered those questions. See if Northern Pulp answered to your satisfaction what it is that you were concerned about when you wrote your public response. And if they didn't answer to your satisfaction, or if they ignored your question entirely, then set that out in your response. Say, look, last time I asked X, Y, and Z, they didn't answer that. I still have that same concern. I'm still asking that same question. You may wonder, okay, I did write a response last March. Do I have to write that all over again? No, you don't need to rewrite it. What you can do is refer to your last submission this time. And as I said before, you can state the questions that they have answered and the questions that they didn't answer. And as it says there, but you can also write about different issues. If after reading the focus report you have additional concerns, or you have questions that you've never thought of before, or you have something to say that didn't make it to your last submission, go ahead and put it in again. And we have an example there. If in your last submission you said that you fished lobster in the area of the diffuser, but you might have noticed in your focus report shows that there's no lobster fishing in the area of the diffuser, tell them what they've gotten wrong. Tell them, despite what you're saying, I do fish lobster in that area. And we'll come back to that in a bit. So you may be wondering, what happened to all the information that I gave them last time? What happened to all those almost, we're told, 900 responses that the public made to the original environmental assessment registration? You have to know that that's still in play. All that information that was filed by us last time and filed by the various government departments, it's still part of the package that Nova Scotia Environment Minister must consider. So you have to think about this as, perhaps think of it as a big box. Everything goes into that box. So we have the environmental assessment that Northern Pulp filed back in January. That goes into the box. We have all of the public responses that we provided last time. That goes into the box. All of the government responses from the various government departments, that goes into the box, as does the focus report, as does the, ready for the next slide? So, where can I find the information? There is a lot of information in that box that I just spoke about, and it is sometimes difficult to find it. So here's some useful tips. So start with the focus report. Start with that document that that Northern Pulp filed and was recently made public to us earlier this month. Look in the table of contents Table of contents, of course, sets out all of the topics that's set out in the focus report, and find the topic that interests you or that you have some knowledge about or some information that you want to learn more about. Don't forget that as part of the focus report that there are a number of appendices, so there are a number of documents that are attached to the back of the focus report itself that may relate to the topic that you're looking at. So for example, if you're looking at section 9 is human health, you can't just read section 9 of the focus report because there's also some appendices attached that refer to human health as well. So look in all those different areas. Once you've done that, go back to the original EA registration document. So go back to what Northern Pulp filed back in January. See what they said about, I'm going to run with the same theme, see what they said about human health at that time. Are there any discrepancies in their information? Is there still some information that's missing? Is there information that's wrong? Comment on those things. Also look at Appendix 0, which is an odd reference, impacts and mitigation, because some of the more broader topics are set out there. Also online you'll find the concordance table that I spoke about earlier, so it's the listing of all the questions and concerns that the public and government departments had, and then Northern Pulp made reference as to where the answer to those questions or concerns may be found in the documents. Also, for us non-techies out there, if you know that you've read something about concordance, where is that concordance? I can't find that word anywhere. Then you can use the function Control F to find that word. Here it says edit find, so that might be some other, that's for Mac users, but if you're not a MacBook user, then you use the search function Control F. It'll prompt you to type in your word, so type in the word concordance, and you'll be able to find wherever that word is printed in the document. So that's a helpful, easy way to find what you're looking for. And remember, you don't have to read the whole document. There are thousands and thousands of pages, and some of us are reading it, but not everyone in this room has to, you don't have to do that. So the decision being made by the Minister of Environment is based on the Environment Act and the Environmental Assessment Act and the regulations made pursuant to those pieces of legislation. So the Act sets out a number of factors that the Minister must weigh, must look at, must consider when he is making this decision. The Minister must decide if the project would cause adverse or negative effects or significant environmental effects. And if it is concluded that it may cause adverse or significant effects, then can those effects be mitigated? So can Northern Pulp do something to eliminate those effects, to reduce those effects or control those effects? And of course, they've said, of course, they can mitigate them all. We may have something different to say about that.
So now's the fun part. I get to talk about legislation. I know that's what you all came out to talk about today, so here we go. No, before I mention that, I just wanted to take one quick step back and acknowledge that we're on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and that we're deeply grateful that they are willing to share their territory with us today. I also wanted to thank Wes and Pictou Lodge for having us, and thank you to you all for coming out to listen to us about legislation and writing comments today. But I particularly wanted to acknowledge and thank the Fawns people, the Friends of the Northumberland Strait, all their members and the work they've done on this project. I'm continually astounded at the dedication and the emails I get in the middle of the night, and all the work that happens all the time on your behalf and on behalf, because they're passionate and they care deeply about this project. And I'm full of admiration, and I want to thank them for that. And I think we should give them a hand. One other comment, and that is tomorrow's obviously the election. It's a good example of an opportunity to exercise your democratic rights. It's what everybody thinks of when they think of that right that we all have. But I think what the process we're in on this project is another example, very important one, of how to participate in your democracy as a citizen of Canada, of Nova Scotia, of this area, and of living here. I think it all has differing impacts on all of us, or on you all, and on me as counsel for Friends of the Northumberland Strait. But this is a real opportunity to participate. You don't have to be shy, you don't have to apologize for doing so. It's your right to do it, and you should exercise that right where you think and how you think it's appropriate to do it. So coming back to the Act, as Jill mentioned, the Act defines certain terms, and as can you just flip back to the previous slide? The minister has to decide if the project will cause adverse, negative, in other words, effects, or significant environmental effects, or if those, and if any of them do qualify as adverse or significant environmental effects, can they be mitigated? And if they can be mitigated, theoretically, the minister can permit the project to proceed. You may see in the document, you'll see the terminology used, significant environmental or significant residual environmental effects. And that's their terminology for the same thing, meaning residual, it can't be mitigated, in other words. And they say there aren't any. So, but that's the terminology that we're dealing with. And these terms are defined on the next slide. We've summarized the definitions that you'll see in the Act. An adverse effect, and I won't go through them all, but it's, I think you all have access to this PowerPoint, and you can get it online. And it will, so you can decide how much of this you want to read, but it gives you a good idea of what you should be looking at when you're writing your comments. The kinds of things you might want to comment on are also things that make up the definition. So the minister has to look at it in a certain legal way, and these factors are things the minister must look at when he is making his decision. And we've included the actual wording of the Act as well. In there's a link at the bottom if you want to click on that. In the previous slide, there's a link, and that will take you right to the Act and show you what the minister, what you need to know about the process you're in. Now, this is a summary of the issues that the minister has to consider, and this comes from the regulations, which are under the Environment Act. The first is that obviously the location of the undertaking, the nature and sensitivity of the surrounding area, and this is something most of you will know a lot about. Especially the latter part of it, the nature and sensitivity of the surrounding area, and how this might affect that. So, be aware this is something your authority's on. Nobody knows this better than you do. You can't come in and study it for a month and think you know everything about this area. People who live here, work here, fish here, operate businesses here, you know it better than anyone. So don't be afraid to talk about how those things will be affected, the things that you value here. Concerns expressed by the public and Aboriginal people about the adverse effects or the environmental effects of the proposed undertaking. That's what you're doing. That's why we're here, is to encourage you to exercise your right to express comments and your concerns about the project. That's what this process is for. If we take the materials that are published by the Nova Scotia Environment at face value, they have published a thing called the Citizen's Guide to Environmental Assessment, and it stresses the importance of public participation in the environmental assessment process. And please use that, right? Please do that, and we hope they will take it as seriously as their documentation says they do. I won't go through all the list on the slide. I think it's self-explanatory, but these are things that you might feel you can comment on. I mean, some of you may have expertise in land use or planning or some of the other things that are happening in the area that contribute to the impacts. For example, the Strait is a finite body of water, despite how it's presented at times in some of the materials. It actually can't take anything that you throw into it. It has its limits. And so you can comment on that, you can comment on other things. So I encourage you just to read through that, and you'll understand, get a sense of what you might feel you can comment on. The next slide, please. I think that's chill. So.
Okay, so what we also must be prepared for is if this matter ends up going to court. So if the matter is brought forward to the court, the judge can only make his or her decision based on what has been brought forward during this process. So I talked earlier about this box. Okay, so in that box was the original submission of Northern Pulp, the public's response that we provided last spring, the focus report, the terms of reference, everything that we as a public are going to bring forward now in response to this focus report. All that is in the box. And if this goes to court, that box will be closed, and we will not be able to bring anything more to the court to consider. So though there might be something missing and something that we really, really wanted the court to know, and that it might be really important for the court to know, we likely would not be able to bring that forward during a court challenge. That's why it is vitally, vitally important that we as a public all participate in the process, that we all write to the environment minister to tell him exactly what we know about Northumberland Strait and about the land-based portion of the route, about the air emissions. Now is the time to have that input. It's very, very important. So the next part of our presentation is what should you include in your submission. Don't be intimidated. Everyone has something of value to add. Okay? We're not all PhDs, we're not all educated in the traditional sense of that word. We are experts simply because we live here and because we know the Northumberland Strait. We've either grown up beside it, we've lived here for a period of time, we have cottages, we love being out in the Strait. Maybe we enjoy the wetlands along the 106. Maybe we enjoy the causeway and the cormorants that are there. Or maybe not. But your observations and your experiences in living in this area and visiting this area and being in this area is so very important to put down in writing and express to the minister. So don't feel that you have nothing to add because of you not having a PhD, for example. And also don't be intimidated by the volume of material, the volume of paper that has been thrown at us. I sometimes think that perhaps that's part of their strategy. Let's just throw a whole bunch at them and people will look at it and go, I don't want to touch that, I don't want to look at that. You can break it down into manageable pieces. And we gave you hints earlier about using the table of contents, your word search on your computer to narrow down your focus to what it is that you know. So as I said, local knowledge is important. You know the details about the land and the sea. These experts, they don't know. They haven't, in a lot of cases, they haven't been here. They're just relying on information that Northern Pulp is telling them to be true. And not all that information is accurate, as we know. So, down to the nitty-gritty then. When you're starting to write your response to the focus report. Step 1. State that you're writing in relation to the focus report on Northern Pulp proposed replacement effluent treatment facility project. Nova Scotia Department of Environment has a lot of projects that they work on all at once. We want to make sure that they know that our response is in relation to this specific project. See how easy it is? Step 2. This is where you provide information about yourself. Of course, set out your name and address. Give background information relating to your submission. Know that local knowledge is considered, as I said before, and set out any formal credentials that you may have. If you do have a PhD, or you have other education that is relevant, you have a trade ticket that's relevant to this, employment experience, or experience in groups or committees dealing with the related subjects, state those specifically and go into a lot of detail about that. If you've been a member of a local birding society, state that. State that you've been a member for 20 years and that you've been to a number of conferences in spotting birds, or any sort of detail like that that allows the minister to look at your proposal in a different light. Look at them as saying, okay, yeah, he or she, they do have some knowledge or experience or credentials that make this person's proposal something that we should maybe take a closer look at. You may also want to include how Northern Pulp's proposal affects you. Do you have a cottage not far from here? Have you been visiting that cottage for your entire life? Well, state that. You've been walking the beach, you've been in the water, you've been maybe living not far from here, but are very familiar with the area. State all of that in your opening proposal statement.
So this is step 3, and I think it's helpful to focus on something that is particularly important to you. So we're a tip, and you of course will know what you can comment on and what you can't. But I would suggest that don't try to answer everything in that report. None of us can do that. I don't think anyone in this room could possibly do that. We all have to focus on what is important or what we think we can actually make a difference if we make a comment on. And don't underestimate your ability to make a difference. I don't want you to think that way, but I would say focus on a few points that matter the most. And and something that you may be knowledgeable about or have a great deal of experience in, or you have some training in, or that you just know what the impacts are going to be, something like that. And focus on that, and then organize your submission around those points to say, I'm going to do 3 points, and here they are, 1, 2, 3, and then go. The next part will be to talk about each of those points in turn, and then sum it up maybe at the end. And I don't want to jump ahead to the next slides, but then step 4. A useful way to deal with this is, because unfortunately, I think it's going to be a given that Northern Pulp's submission will be the primary submission. So it's not ours, even though we would like it to be. It will be Northern Pulp's submission, and the way they've organized it, that will be the first reference point for this environmental assessment and for this focus report. So we need to respond to them. That's how this process is designed. So it's best to be specific if you can. Instead of saying, I don't like how they talk about fishers, or I don't like about what they say about marine species, find those points in the section of the focus report or in the appendices that speak to a particular thing that you have an issue with, and then point it out. So, for example, at paragraph 9.1, at paragraph 7053, please, they say this and I disagree, and this is why, and that because I know better, because I've seen this, and that doesn't happen that way, or whatever it is that you need to comment on. But be specific, and it's better, you can take out a brick out of, if that's your position, then you can take out a piece of the puzzle, and if you take out enough pieces, it falls apart. So take out one little piece, you can count on it that other people are taking out pieces as well. And just building on that, I guess, if you, in those points or in those sections, if you see errors or problems in the information or inconsistencies, then point that out. So you can say, they say this, it is inaccurate because of this. And that, of course, invites you to question what you're reading, and you will be, I'm sure. But is it accurate? Is there something missing? Are they pretending that this is the whole picture when really it needs more information than what they presented? Is it kind of selective, overly selective? And is that doing some harm to the big picture? Are they showing the whole story or not? And is it reliable? So are the things that they're referring to, is that recent? Is it comprehensive? Is it, does the data that's there, and there's a pile of data in this report, does it actually support the conclusions that are being drawn? And every one of you may spot something that the rest of us don't see. So feel free to look at whatever you want, but and then if you feel, if you want to get into it in this kind of detail, go in and look at the data that they cite in there for a particular premise, and then follow the chain through the reports and see if it actually leads to the conclusion that they draw at the end of the process. And you may find it's completely disconnected, or maybe it does. Maybe there's a logical progression and it actually does prove what they say it proves, and who knows.
I'm going to jump in.
Okay. Yes, great.
So on the topic of errors or misrepresentations or missing information, we thought that we would put out a couple of examples so you know what we're talking about. And maybe some of you fishers out there have, maybe you've noticed this particular slide. It talks about the location of lobster buoys. So the different colors that you see here are representative of the dates that they've taken a flyby to record the information on, so 3 different days, 3 different colors. And what this shows is where the cluster of buoys were located on each of those days. And you'll see that it appears they are trying to conclude that because on each of those 3 days, there was
information. It's never happened.
West to the rescue. Thank you so much. So, I believe that they're trying to conclude that because on each of those 3 days there were no clusters of buoys that they found around the effluent diffuser, that there must not be any lobster fishing around there. So, this raises a lot of concerns in my mind. First of all, what is a cluster of buoys? How do you define that? I haven't been able to see anywhere in the documentation as to what they mean by a cluster of buoys. How many buoys make a cluster? Is it 1, 2, 500? We don't know.
And they're also showing that it's a land map they're using for a sea picture. That's not a nautical map, so it doesn't show how shallow it would be there anyway.
You're right, it certainly does not. But you fishers out there probably know fishing grounds right in the area of that diffuser, whether you fish there yourself or you observe other fishers fishing lobster in the area of the diffuser. That's the type of information that Northern Pulp doesn't know. That's the type of information that the Department of Environment doesn't know, the Environment Minister doesn't know. It's the information that fishers know, or the public knows. So that's the type of information that we're talking about as far as local knowledge that needs to be set out in writing and filed with your public response, so that they are aware this is not an accurate reflection of lobster fishing in that area. So that's but one example. We have more. So there is a scallop buffer zone in this area that was put in place to protect juvenile American lobster. And we know that that scallop buffer zone is within 1 nautical mile of all land. But we also know in their previous assessment that they have represented the scallop buffer zone as the pink area showing on that sketch. Well, you notice that it doesn't extend beyond all pieces of land. They've conveniently left out the area around Caribou Island, and it doesn't extend to the north of Monroe's Island. So that's an issue. That needs to be pointed out, and it was pointed out by some of us I know last time. So they're saying that the diffuser does not fall within that scallop buffer zone. They're saying it doesn't fall within 1 nautical mile off a point of land. Well, we have illustration here from Ryan, who's a fisher, who's on fawns. The bottom picture shows him using the scale that is located on the table, or the figure that was posted, and he drew a circle around the diffuser, and lo and behold, it does fall within the 1 nautical mile scallop buffer zone. So again, that's important information that we know. Northern Pulp did not put in their submission, but the Department of Environment and the Environment Minister, he needs to know that information, and we need to provide it to him.
What's that?
So, as we've alluded to already, the report essentially continues the same conclusion that the original environmental assessment registration materials concluded, which was that there will be no significant residual harm, it's not reversible, and or cannot be mitigated. And so, I mean, this is the ultimate conclusion, and they want the minister to reach this conclusion. So and they've spent a huge amount of effort to try to have that conclusion drawn, and there's an awful lot of information that comes in behind that to determine whether that's an accurate conclusion. I mean, I personally don't agree with it, but you may agree with it. But we invite you to use your own judgment about how they get to that conclusion. I mean, this is a bigger question than a specific point, and so it's a little different than what I was talking about earlier. But you can do this with any conclusion in the materials, but including this ultimate conclusion that there will be no significant residual harm. But are the risks properly identified, and are they given due weight, or are they underestimated? Or are there conclusions drawn that don't have facts that actually support them, or are the facts convincing? Is the evidence that is said to support it, is that convincing or not? Or is there other information that contradicts those facts, and therefore the conclusion can't be drawn? Does it draw improper comparisons and therefore create invalid conclusions? So, for example, I can't think of one this time, although I'm sure there are some, but in the original materials, they tried to say that Pictou Harbour would be exactly the same as the Caribou Channel, Caribou Harbour in terms of water quality, etc. So if we know a bit about Pictou Harbour, therefore we must know about Caribou Harbour. And that was a comparison that I think even the minister recognized was not going to work, it's not going to fly, and asked them to get specific data for Caribou Harbour. And that kind of thing there will be other instances of that throughout. So please, if you do know of those, you can highlight them and explain why the comparisons are incorrect or invalid, or the conclusions that are drawn from them are not supported. And then, of course, you want to show what information you have or know about that will lead to a different conclusion. So you could refer to scientific studies, you could refer to your own experience, there will be other sources of information as well that you might want to refer to. So, for example, if you do know of scientific studies, it's important that you would identify the study. So a vague reference to the fact of the existence of a scientific study somewhere may not be enough. It'd be better to find a copy of the study if you can, or ask somebody who you might think might be able to find it for you, and then give the name and the author and the place where it was published. If it's a book or in a journal, identify the journal that it's in and the date and the other information. If you want to, you can even attach a copy to your submission. And that might be the easiest thing to do, is to just print a copy and stick it in. And then there's no doubt as to what you're referring to. And again, if the information you find that contradicts something that's in the report, if it comes from your own experience, simply explain the basis for that. I've fished there for 30 years. I know that this is so. I see it every year. I see it every season. It's always like this. I mean, there's nobody that can contradict that information. It's about as solid as it gets. So then, we don't want to be scary about this, but this could be the last time that we have a chance to comment on this process. The window for public comments, as you know, is very small. We actually have a second, keeping in mind that the minister's job is to evaluate the risks of this project and to decide whether it should go ahead, if the risks are too great, or whether it can go ahead. So I think I've kind of covered that slide. So the next slide is step number 7. Once you've sort of gone through that process, so we tried to outline for you, then summarize your arguments again. So to talk about, and you want to make sure that you state your point. Ideally, state your point at the beginning and then at the end again. It's just it's an effective way of explaining something. You might want to state it in slightly different ways in the beginning and the end, just to make sure that it's understood, but it doesn't hurt to say it twice, as long as you're not fully repeating yourself. You want to make sure that you're being effective in communication. And then say what you want the minister to do. Now, there are only a limited number of choices left because of the stage of the process we're in. So the minister can approve the project with conditions, subject to legal challenges. The minister can take another step and say, I still don't have nearly enough information. I will now order a full-blown environmental assessment report. I have a little trouble understanding what more could be in there. However, the minister may think of something, may need something else, and that is within the minister's power to order. I don't mean that what we've got is complete. What I mean is, I don't know that the minister can ask for more because he has asked for a lot. And then the third option is to reject the project. There is another one, which is an option to order an alternate dispute resolution, which could be some kind of mediation or some kind of arbitration. I don't think that's likely, but it's possible. It is an option that's open to the minister. And just continuing on with that is be clear what you want the minister to do and why will it make a difference that the minister does what you're asking the minister to do. And then, again, as we've said, you may want to ask the minister to reject the proposal if you are asking for that, because the information does not, the information provided does not prove that there will be no adverse environmental effects, or that there is a positive likelihood that there will be effects. So either there's not enough information to show that it's going to be benign, or that in fact there's enough information to show that it will be harmful. So either one might be something you could say if that is what you believe.
So you've taken all the steps, done all the work, so what do you do with it now? You need to send it on to Nova Scotia Environment. The details are there. You can send it by email, you can send it by fax, you can send it by mail. They also have a form online that you can fill out, but it would be only appropriate for more brief comments. And don't forget that your submission must be put forward on or before Friday, November the 8th, 1 minute before midnight. And so those of you who are wanting to access this presentation online, there's a link there at the bottom as to where you can find Northern Pulse Complete project filings. So we have an optional step here for you to consider. If you wish, we would like you to forward your submission to us at Friends Northumberland Strait so that we can post it on our website for other people to read. That's our email address there. And if you ask us to, we will remove your name and contact information. We would probably do that anyways, before we post it online. There is another link on this page where you can find Northern Pulse original EA documents, including the submission made by Ecojustice, which was very fabulous, of course, and thank you very much for that. Also good responses made by the Fishermen's Working Group and the town of Pictou.
The person still, or the person or group or people or whatever, they still have to submit to the Department of Environment, that
That's-
this is, they can also do this.
That's right. That's right. We will not be forwarding your submissions to environment for you. You must do that on your own. The step 10 that we referred to is just an optional submission to us so that we can post it online.
Also, if you are providing comments, you need to know that they will be posted publicly. So they're not confidential. Anything you submit in the process, it's a public process. They will be published, and so anyone can see them online. So just be aware of that if that's a concern to you. So the next few slides are just a few more tips that we have put together that might help you in determining what you might want to say or how you want to say it. As I said before, if you use the materials that Northern Pulp has filed or their consultants to prove your point if you can, so you can say, even if this is true, it still does so-and-so, for example. Or you may not accept that it's true, but you can say, for the sake of argument, even if it's true, it still doesn't lead to the conclusion X or whatever. Or you may say, it's a wonderful project, I think it's great, you should go ahead. Whatever you want to do. I'm just saying that it is useful to, it's easier for a decision maker to know what the points of agreement are between the parties when you are making an argument. So you can understand where you differ and where you are in agreement. So it's just one thing that helps the decision-making process a little bit. And the second part of the tip is if there are contradictions within the materials, they're bound to be in 2,600 pages. Point them out if you see them. If you see something that really doesn't make sense and that it says A here and B there, and they are in contradiction to each other, point it out. The second tip is to keep your submission factual. I don't mean that there isn't room for a certain amount of feeling. I think a lot of people are passionate about this project, and it matters to a lot of people, and that's important. So don't lose that. But make sure that you ground your submission in fact. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, this process is, we have heard through the media, politicians have talked about this being a science-based inquiry, and I don't mean to disparage that. Problem with the science-based inquiry is who's presenting the science and how is it being presented, not necessarily with the underlying information. And what's left out, for example, of the science, that could be also important. Or what was never studied, because the bad conclusion might have been reached if they had studied such a thing. So there are gaps, and some of them are intentional probably, and some of them are just inadvertent gaps within the materials. But when you're writing it, we have heard from several politicians that it is to be a science-based inquiry. So I suspect that if it is mostly, I hate this project because I just don't like it and it makes me mad, your submission is going to be ignored. Whereas if you talk about something factual, scientific, or something based on your own experience that is factually incorrect, that without too much personal opinion being involved, I think that's probably the better way to get your submission heard. And I don't want to dismiss personal opinion. Don't get me wrong, it's important and everybody is going to have an opinion, and you shouldn't hide from that. It's just, don't make it only about that, because I don't think you're going to get listened to. Tip number 3, again, please cite the papers. If you have something that you are referring to as scientific study or a document published by, for example, Fisheries and Oceans or Health Canada, cite the document, put in a link to it, or even put the document itself in with your submission to make sure we know what document it is and explain why you're using that document and what it means and what you want the minister to take from that material. If there's a document or a long quote that provides information you think is important, you can include it as a footnote or an appendix. Usually a rule of writing is don't put in too many big block quotes in your materials. Just refer to the source of those materials rather than repeating it all in your own submission. You say what you need to say and draw from your source, but don't just say again what the other person said. Just cite to that, and or else include what they said in your own, in their, as an appendix to your material. Photos are great. Photos are very good, and sometimes that's way easier to express an idea or a situation than if you try to describe it. I think that everybody understands that sometimes. And again, don't flood them with photos. I would say pick some choice photos that are really doing what you need them to do and use those. And just a simple evidentiary issue, make sure that you include the date, the location, and the name of the person who took it, and you may want to caption it and say, this is a picture of Caribou Harbor in July 2019, or whatever it is that you have or want to present, just so that we all know who, what that's showing the person. Because you may all know what that view is, but the minister may not. Tip number 6, again, refer to, if you can, keep up, refer to up-to-date scientific studies. Something maybe from the 1930s may not be useful anymore. It might be, but be careful with that kind of thing. Being the science-based inquiry, it's going to be seen as less persuasive the older it is, and so just be aware of that. Again, as we said, this is the last opportunity for public comment, and so please be aware that this may be your final chance to comment on this project, at least before it's approved or before a decision is made. You may still comment afterwards, it just won't have the same legal effect. And again, just keep in mind, at this point, although you might want to, and as Jill have said, you may want to comment on the process that's being followed. Say it's too short, I didn't get enough chance to comment. Unlike Northern Pulp, I didn't actually have any funding to prepare my scientific reports. So so it's valid to comment on those things. But the minister is now going to be looking at, does this project show that there will be adverse effects that cannot be mitigated, or environmental effects that cannot be mitigated? And so those are the things. So really, you want to focus maybe on the substantive actual effects rather than on the process now being followed. So I don't mean you shouldn't comment on the process, but the minister's now going to be looking at this project and whether he should approve it or not. He's not going to care anymore whether he followed a fair process. He's probably said, well, I'm stuck with what I did now, so whatever we can make of it later, we'll try.
So we said it's some important links or important things that you should know. They're listed there, and when you go online, there will be links to that information. We also have handouts that we provided to every table. If you don't have one, there are extra ones here at our table. How does the minister decide is on one side, and what information must the minister consider is on the other side? It occurred to me as well when I was reviewing the focus report that the table of contents doesn't direct you to where the addendums are. And by addendums, I mean the additional things to consider that the environment minister set out in the terms of reference. So when you look at the terms of reference document, it sets out all the questions to be answered and the further studies to be conducted. And the last couple pages of that is entitled Addendum, Items Raised by Reviewers Requiring Clarification. And if you looked in the table of contents, you wouldn't be able to find that anywhere because it's not listed. Addendums are not listed in the table of contents. But you can find them on page 190 of the focus report and pages following that. So keep that in mind as well when you're reviewing your specific topics. So that is it for our 10-step guide. Easy peasy, right?